Hi, today on Franklin's Group Sewing Tips we're showing you how to sew ties and rouleau loops. So the first thing is you're going to want to cut your ties, and you're going to want to cut them on the bias rather than on the straight grain. So if you have one of these quilting rulers, they're really handy. They have these measurements for angles drawn onto them. So we're going to use the 45-degree line here, and we're going to line it up with the straight edge of our fabric. And that then means that the side of the board is going to be 45 degrees from that angle. So I'm going to cut along. And I've now got a piece of fabric cut on the bias. I'm going to slide my ruler over, and my strips are going to be 1.5 inches wide. Really depends on how wide you want your ruler loops to be, but 1.5 inches wide. My strips, my ruler loops end up being about 1/4 of an inch wide. So there we go. I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine. And as you can see here at the back, I have seam allowance measurements, so I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is my preferred. If you want to use your normal 5/8 of an inch for dressmaking, then you'd need to cut your strip a little bit wider, maybe 1.75 inches as opposed to 1.5 inches. I'm going to fold it in half, bring it in underneath the foot, and I like to start quite far in from the raw edge of the fabric. A, it's cut on the diagonal, but B, if you start too close to the edge, the pressure of the needle trying to go through the fabric can just push all the fabric down into the feed dogs where the needle plate is, which is no good at all. So you're going to sew all the way down, and when you come to the end, you're going to do a little reverse or a lock stitch, whichever your preferred method is, and then trim off. Lovely, so that's your strip sewn. You can see we've got quite a bit of seam allowance there. So now what we need to do is trim that down. So I'm going to use a nice sharp pair of scissors, and I'm going to trim my seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch, or about 3 millimeters, all the way along. So the first one I'm going to show you is a prim loop turner. So it has this latch hook at the end of it, and it slides down into the tube like this, and then the latch hook end of it I like to face the fold of the fabric, and then as I slide the fabric over it, you can pierce through the fabric with the little latch hook. See, it just pops out, and then it slides up and it locks in place to stop your fabric from popping off the end again. Get back in focus, there we go. And then you just need to get this started by helping the fabric over the end. So you can trim the ends off, which will help a bit, but really you've just got to kind of fiddle the end over, and then once it's over, it goes really quickly, like you can see. Turn it all the way through, and there we go. That's your first rouleau loop done. Give it a good press, clean up the ends. Lovely stuff. So second method is using a piece of ribbon. So your ribbon needs to be narrower than the finished width of the rouleau loop you want to make. So I'm going to take my ribbon, bring it inside my piece of fabric, and fold the fabric over it. And then I'm just going to stitch straight across like that, and I'm going to shorten my stitch length right down to 1 millimeter, so that I really am going to definitely get the ribbon. If your stitch length's too long, sometimes you can just jump straight over the ribbon and not really securely fasten it. And then take my stitch length back to my normal 2.4 millimeters it is for this G-Key DX7, and then stitch all the way down, keeping your ribbon pressed over toward the side seam. If your seam allowance goes a little bit wonky, it's really not the end of the world. Try not to worry too much about it. Try and keep it straight if you can. And then reverse a little bit, trim off, and there we go. So the way this one works, you're going to trim off the tail of the ribbon. Again, you'll need to trim your seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch, all the way along. Just makes it easier for turning and everything cleaner. Tidy up the end, and then come back down to the bottom, and when you pull on the ribbon, it cinches the fabric up along the ribbon. Again, come up to the top and just help the first fold over the end of the ribbon, and then once you've done that, like that, you just pull on the ribbon and it all just turns through. The only downside to this method is obviously you do waste quite a bit of ribbon, but it's nice and easy. There we go. And then you can chop that off. Again, tidy it all up, give it a press, and that's your second rouleau loop done. Okay, so for our third, we're going to use this turning set also by Prim. It has a medium, a large and a small option depending on the size of the tie that you want to make. But it's basically a tube with a kind of a bamboo stick. That's the large, that's the medium, a little bit smaller, and the small one is really quite small and it has a metal stick as opposed to a bamboo stick. So with these ones you need to finish the ends, so this is really more for a tie than it is for a rouleau loop, but you could still use it, you would just need to then trim that end off when it's finished. But you need to have an end to your tube. So again, you're going to trim your seam allowance, and then from the open end of the tube you're going to put your little plastic tool inside all the way down to the end, leave a little bit of wiggle room for the fabric at the end, and then the stick goes inside and it pushes the fabric through against the tube and turns it through for you. So I find these the easiest. There we go. Lovely, all the way through. Take the tube back off, and the handy thing with this is because it has a pointy end to it and your stick's already in there, you can use it for tidying up your ends. There we go. Beautiful. So take the stick back out, and that's your first tie done in the medium width. I'm going to show you the small one as well. So they work in exactly the same way. I've just got a slightly smaller tube this time. I'm going to pop my plastic tube inside. Yeah, take my metal stick and pop it through. Oh, lost contact. Put it back in again. So with this one, I tend to find that the stick doesn't actually go down inside the tube. It's more the fabric pushes against it. You can see it doesn't really go very far down, but it still works perfectly well. And then again, give it a little poke at the end to get into the corners. There we go. So these are really good for ties on little girls' dresses and things like that. Lovely stuff. There we go. So those are the two ones we made with the tube turner, that one with the long ribbon, and that one with the latch hook. There we go. I hope that helps you make your tie-up tops or your dresses or whatever it is you're using them for. Thanks very much. Bye.